Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Flourishing Talks, a series of webinars that explores the connection between wisdom and everyday life by inviting scientists, professionals, and experts in their fields. My name is Professor Amin Zanjari, and I'm going to be your host along with Dr. Saif Allah, the founder of Human Flourishing Engineering Institute. Welcome to this webinar, Dr. Ardelt, and we are honored today to have you with us. Honestly, we do have a lot of questions about wisdom. This subject consumes us and it becomes the topic of a new season of Flourish Talks, and it's all about practical wisdom and human flourishing. So before we begin, let me introduce you our special guest today, Dr. Monika Ardelt. Dr. Monica, you are an associate professor of sociology at the University of Florida. You are a Brookdale National Fellow, a fellow of Gerontological Society of America, and the executive secretary of the Society for the Study of Human Development. Your research focuses on successful human development across the life course, with particular emphasis on the relationship between wisdom, psychology, spirituality, aging well, and dying well. For the last 25 years or so, you have been at the cutting edge of wisdom research. You are responsible for the development of the highly respected and widely used the three-dimensional wisdom scale. Welcome. And now another word welcome to our host Professor Saif. And any word, Professor Saif, we started. The floor is yours. If you have anything to say to Dr. Monica.
No, nothing. Just getting excited looking at this exquisite title, Practical Wisdom and Human Flourishing. So I'm eager to discover what's behind.
All right. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I mean, this is really exciting and I love flourishing. You know, I love to talk about wisdom. I love to talk about flourishing. Just one little correction. I have been promoted a couple of years ago to Professor of Sociology. So no longer Associate Professor. So just a little correction here. Took me long enough. Trust me, it took me long enough. So anyway, so I want to start with this quote by Michel de Montaigne. The most manifest signs of wisdom is a continual cheerfulness. Her state is like that of things in the regions above the moon, always clear and serene. I think that's a really nice summary of what wisdom is, and I think we can explore this a little bit further today. So this is my overview of the presentation. I want to introduce different kinds of well-being, then talk about the difference between personality adjustment and personality growth. I give you some hypotheses about the relations between wisdom, flourishing, and subjective well-being, and then I introduce the three-dimensional wisdom model that I have, let's say, refined. I didn't develop it, but I refined it. And then I present quantitative and qualitative findings about the association between wisdom, flourishing, and well-being, and then summarize and conclude. So let's talk about what kind of well-being first. When we think of well-being, most people think about subjective well-being, and subjective well-being typically is also called hedonic well-being. So it's something which sounds a little bit selfish, you know, but it's pleasure. The indicators are life satisfaction, happiness, positive affect, absence of depression. And of course, in some ways, I think this is kind of the goal. You know, we want to feel good. But Carol Riff, in a seminal article in 1989, was kind of criticizing subjective well-being research. And she says it lacks theoretical grounding. Well, why? What's the point, right, of this subjective well-being research? And she argued that happiness isn't everything, and we shouldn't focus on psychological subjective well-being, but we should focus more on psychological well-being, because this is what we might be able to actually develop. Now, psychological well-being is also based on the tradition of Aristotle. It's called eudaimonic well-being, and that is what's related to flourishing. So it's a realization of human potential, or one's true nature, one's daemon, And that is what leads to flourishing, feeling wellness, and not just happy in terms of fleeting happiness, but the more consistent feeling of well-being. So that's why it's called psychological well-being rather than more fleeting happiness. And according to Carol Riff, the indicators of psychological well-being or flourishing are self-acceptance, positive relations with others, autonomy, environmental mastery, purpose in life, and continued personal growth. So Ursula Staudinger and colleagues, however, make a distinction between personality adjustment and personality growth. They argue that personality adjustment is what we need to do, what everybody needs to do. It's an adjustment of personality to given societal conditions, to societal rules, norms, societal expectations. So this is what children are socialized to do, to adjust to society, basically. And they argue that the indicators are subjective well-being, if it's successful, if people adjust to societal expectations, subjective well-being, happiness, but also mastery and self-acceptance, which comes from the psychological well-being part. And they say it's normative because we're getting socialized into, and it tends to increase with age because we're getting better with age. We learn how to adjust to societal expectations. And then they say there's a difference between personality adjustment and personality growth. Now, personality growth is a transformation of a personality. It's a transformation toward basically greater wisdom, or growing in some ways to become kinder, more compassionate, more self-transcendent. And this requires increases in self-insight, integrity, self-transcendence, and balancing one's own good with that of others. So not just thinking about myself, but also thinking about other people. And the indicators that they name is an orientation toward personal growth, purpose in life, and wisdom. And as you see here, again, I highlighted this in green. This is part of flourishing, part of psychological well-being. But they say it's optional and relatively rare. It's optional because society isn't really promoting personality growth. They are focusing on personality adjustment so that society works smoothly. People follow the rules, follow the norms, but society doesn't really care about that people are transformed and become more self-transcendent. And therefore, because it's not pushed by society, it's not pushed in institutions like education in or schools and universities, it's relatively rare. It basically depends on the individual, right? If they are voluntarily want to go on this journey of personality growth. Now, as you see, Staudinger and colleagues put saying personality adjustment will not lead to wisdom. However, I am arguing that wisdom is a prototype of both personality adjustment and personality growth, because wise people tend to be resilient, they have a mastery of life, they have a superior ability to deal with life's vicissitudes, and they tend to feel well, subjective well-being. But they also engage in personality growth. They have a deep understanding of life, a sense of purpose in life. They develop self-transcendence and compassionate love for all. So I say that wisdom covers both. Wise people can follow the rules of society if they make sense, if they are moral, if they are not against morality. But they also engage in personality growth. So what is a general hypothesis about the relations between wisdom, flourishing, and subjective well-being? So I argue that the relation between wisdom and subjective well-being is mediated by eudaimonic well-being or flourishing. So wise people feel well, feel happy, have higher life satisfaction because they are flourishing. So it's flourish. So they develop psychological well-being, and therefore they feel happy. So how is wisdom related to well-being and flourishing in later life? Well, in terms of developmental theories, and these are theories by Erikson, psychosocial growth, Jung, individuation, or Maslow, self-actualization, well-being in old age is primarily the result of psychosocial development and growth across the life course. It's not just what happens in old age, but what happens all the way back until people reach old age. So accumulated wisdom is more important in predicting well-being than objective circumstances. I should qualify this. What's really important predicting well-being is actually subjective health. But there is also this relation between wisdom and health, because if health is bad, or if subjective health, not necessarily objective health, but subjective. But again, there is the very important part of wisdom, and we'll get to that later. So what are the hypotheses about the association between wisdom and well-being in later life? So general hypothesis would be wisdom is significantly related to greater well-being even after controlling for resources and life conditions, even after we control subjective health, for finances, for educational attainment, for being married or not. Even then, wisdom is significantly related to greater well-being, and wisdom is more essential for well-being during adversity, because that is during a time then when other external resources to feel happy might disappear, and then wisdom becomes particularly important. So the relation between wisdom and subjective well-being is also mediated by eudaimonic well-being and flourishing, as I said earlier, in general for all age groups, but also true for older ages. So if we say, so this is our general hypothesis, wisdom is positively related to subjective well-being, but then we qualify this by saying that the association might be stronger under adverse life circumstances. And a mediated pathway would be that wisdom is related to subjective well-being because it's mediated by flourishing. Okay, so before we get to the empirical findings, we should talk about how is wisdom defined and assessed. And there are many different ways now how wisdom is defined. And I will introduce my three-dimensional wisdom model. It is actually based on research by Clayton and Biren. It's, I think it's Clayton dissertations that she wrote in the 1970s. And what she did, she asked people of different ages, young adults, middle-aged adults, and older adults, what they think, what the characteristics of wisdom are, and then used these characteristics to give another set of younger, middle-aged, and older adults, and asked them if they think that these are characteristics of wisdom. And then they did a multidimensional scaling analysis, and they came up with these three dimensions: cognitive, reflective, and affective. And I now have called the affective dimension compassionate dimension, because it's not just any emotions, it's actually compassion that matters. And so this model, when I started out writing my own dissertation, made complete sense to me. And I thought, well, maybe wisdom cannot be measured directly, but it should be possible to measure the cognitive, reflective, compassionate dimensions of wisdom. And that's what I did. And I think it works actually quite well. So if we think about, okay, what are these three dimensions? Wise people. And a lot of people think, well, wise people know something. they know something that other people do not know. And that's the cognitive wisdom dimension. And that's true. Wise people understand life. They understand life deeply. And they also have a desire to know the truth, the deeper truth. And when I talk about understanding life, this refers to the inter and dimensional aspects of life, meaning they understand themselves, they know themselves, but they also understand how to interact with other people. They understand other people. And this requires knowledge and acceptance of positive and negative aspects of human nature. So they understand human nature, they understand the positive and the negative. They also understand the inherent limits of knowledge. When I say they have a desire to know the truth, that they also know that they might never get to the absolute truth, but still they want to get to a deeper truth. And they understand life's unpredictability and uncertainties. And so how would you measure this? So I would say items or ratings, could be ratings, and this can come from existing scales. They should assess the ability and willingness to understand a phenomenon thoroughly, knowledge of the positive and negative aspects of human nature, acknowledgement of life's ambiguity and uncertainty, and the ability to make important decisions despite life's unpredictability and uncertainties, rather than being paralyzed by this fact. Now, to get to this kind of deeper knowledge of life about themselves and others, you need the reflective wisdom dimension. And the reflective wisdom dimension, basically the definition is just a perception of phenomena and events from multiple perspectives. But this includes oneself, looking at oneself from multiple perspectives, from an outer view, like from a third-person view, which requires self-examination, self-awareness, and self-insight. So to operationalize it, items or ratings should assess the ability and willingness to look at phenomena and events from different perspectives, but also there should be an absence of subjectivity and projections. And this is a tendency that we all have it, to blame other people or circumstances for one's own non-ideal situation, let's say. You know, if something bad happens, there is always a tendency to blame somebody else, to blame either external events or somebody else. And wise people don't do that. Now, let me go back to the reflective dimension. By doing this, by looking at things from different perspectives, not only that people can get a deeper understanding of life, but they also understand other people better. They can accept that other people are not perfect, have negative tendencies, and by looking at themselves from a third-person perspective, they can understand that they also have negative tendency, that they are not perfect, and develop tolerance toward others, but also tolerance toward oneself, which decreases ego-centeredness, increases self-transcendence, and leads to greater compassion and self-compassion toward other people, which is the compassionate wisdom dimension. So defined as all-encompassing, sympathetic, and compassionate love, accompanied by a motivation to foster the well-being of all, which requires the transcendence of self-centeredness. And it can basically be measured by the presence of positive, caring, and nurturing emotions and behavior toward others, and the absence of indifferent or negative emotions and behaviors toward others. And how do I measure three-dimensional wisdom? Well, by the three-dimensional wisdom scale that I developed. The cognitive dimension is measured by 14 items. They are all reverse coded. So they actually measure the absence of wisdom. They all are, because when I developed the scale, all the positively worded items, they didn't work. They were affected by social desirability, or there wasn't enough variance, or they didn't correlate with other items. So they're all reverse coded. So ignorance is bliss would be the absence of wisdom. Reflective dimension has 12 items. One example is I always try to look at all sides of a problem, and the compassionate dimension has 13 items. Sometimes I feel a real compassion for everyone. And then to measure wisdom, I take the average of the 3 wisdom dimension, not the average of the 39 items, but the average of the 3 wisdom dimension to weigh all the dimensions equally. All right, well, let's look at a couple of quantitative findings related to the association between wisdom, flourishing, and well-being. I want to start with an undergraduate student sample. This is an unpublished study, so I haven't gotten to publishing it yet. The data come from 230 undergraduate students in the social sciences that were collected at the beginning and end of the fall semester in 2016. The mean age was 21 years and the median age 20 years. Three-fourths of the sample were women and about half were white, the other half were non-white. And if we look at this first, just at the relation between wisdom and life satisfaction. So wisdom at the beginning of the semester was, as predicted, positively related to life satisfaction at the end of the semester. And that's controlling for demographic characteristics, particularly race, because white students were actually tended to have higher scores on life satisfaction than non-white students. But then, as predicted, we're looking at a mediated pathway between wisdom and well-being. So if we look at flourishing in the middle, so wisdom at the beginning of the semester, does it predict flourishing at the end of the semester? And yes, it does. And then flourishing at the end of the semester is related to life satisfaction at the end of the semester. And flourishing here is measured by self-acceptance, mastery, purpose in life, and personal growth orientation. So it's basically taking the average of all these measures, and they are highly related, as you see by the Kronbach's alpha of a 0.78. And by controlling for flourishing, the direct relationship actually disappears between wisdom and life satisfaction. So it's completely mediated by flourishing, but there is an indirect effect that is, as previously, the direct effect, pretty much. Okay, so now I want to present 2 studies on older people, and this comes from the SAGE study. And the SAGE study consisted of respondents with a mean age of 77 years and a median age of 81 years. About half of the respondents were women, 81% were white, about half were married, and then a third attended some college or had an associate degree. So here we are looking at this moderation variable of the occurrence and severity of adverse life events during the past year. So respondents were asked during the past year, 11 events. Did this happen to you? Did your spouse die? Did a pet die? Did you have any major problems with money? Did you have a major conflict with children or grandchildren? And so if they said that the event happened, if they said the event did not happen, they got a 0. But if they said that the event happened, they were asked, how much did it upset you, from didn't upset me at all to 3, event happened and it upset me very much. And then to construct the index, the average of all valid items was computed and then log transformed after adding 1 to reduce the large kurtosis, because a lot of people said, well, none of these events actually happened to me. So when we look at this, first, yes, as before, wisdom was positively related to subjective well-being. And subjective well-being in this case is measured by this latent variable, and the effect indicators are positive mental health, happiness, and life satisfaction. And not surprisingly, if adverse events happened, life events happened during the past year, and people were quite upset by them then this reduced their subjective well-being. This is what you would expect, right? But there was also an interaction effect between wisdom and adverse life events, a positive interaction effect. And what does this mean? Here is wisdom, the relationship between wisdom. If we look at this relationship, and people had no advance. So yes, there was a positive relationship, right? No adverse life effects, positive relationship. But if they had average adverse life effect, this positive relationship became stronger. And if they had above average adverse life events, then it was even stronger. And as you already see here, it really mattered if people were low on wisdom. Here you see the difference. You don't see the difference here. And so another way of showing this is, we are looking here at the relationship between no adverse life events and above average life events and subjective well-being, and then look at what happens for people with low wisdom. Well, there is clearly a negative relationship, right? So that those who had low wisdom, if there were no adverse life events, they were quite happy. But if there were a lot of adverse life events, no happiness. So it's just from 0 to 6 here. But if they had average wisdom, then there's still a negative relationship, but it's much flatter here. And if they had high wisdom, there's actually no relationship whatsoever. So those people with high wisdom, it doesn't matter if they had many adverse life events or no adverse life events affect their subjective well-being. So looking at the same, but now we're looking at the mediated path analysis for average adverse life events. So this is for average adverse life events. And wisdom is positively related to mastery. So this is kind of flourishing. It's positively related with resilience, which I also would call that's part of flourishing. And it reduces perceived stress, this feeling of stress. And not surprisingly, having more mastery and a sense of resilience also reduces perceived stress. Mastery and resilience are also correlated with each other. And then those variables are positively related to subjective well-being, mastery and resilience. And of course, not surprisingly, if you feel more stressed, perceived stress, it's negatively related to subjective well-being. And these three variables, completely mediated the relationship between wisdom and subjective well-being for average adverse life events. Relationship is not significant anymore, but the indirect effect still is. So if you look at the effect, direct effects, indirect effect, and total effect, you see that it's the indirect effect mediated by flourishing and perceived stress that has an effect on subjective well-being. So the total effect is relatively high. But I also just want to point out that subjective health really matters. Remember, these are older adults, and subjective health has a direct effect on subjective well-being, but also an indirect effect through mastery, resilience, and perceived stress. Okay, then there is another study, Aging and Dying Well study, that I conducted earlier. And this suggests another possible moderation between wisdom and well-being, another way. So here the research question is wisdom most beneficial for older adults at the end of life when hedonistic and external means to increase subjective well-being largely disappear? And so the hypothesis would be the effects of wisdom on subjective well-being is greater for individuals at the end of life because wise people are able to accept and cope with the finality of life. And then also as a mediation effect, again, we would say that flourishing, mastery, and purpose in life mediates the relation between wisdom and subjective well-being, and in mastery is predicted to have a positive effect on purpose in life. So the sample to study this comes from two different samples. First, a community sample of 156 older adults between the ages of 52 and 87 from North Central Florida, with a mean age of 71 and a median age of 72. 90% had a high school diploma, almost everyone, and 34% also had a graduate degree. And then the end of life sample, what I call the end of life sample, these are 18 hospice patients. As you know, hospice patients means that they had that they were diagnosed with a terminal illness, and they had were predicted to have 6 months or less to live. But I also include 23 nursing home residents who are not necessarily terminal, but they clearly have a disability or a chronic illness that requires them to live in a nursing home. And their ages were 58 to 98. With a mean and median age of 77. And 73% had a high school diploma, and 12% had also a graduate degree. So if we compare the community sample and the end-of-life sample, not surprisingly, they are pretty much significantly different on all the variables except for race. Only race, they are not different. The community sample was higher on average on subjective well-being, also on wisdom, also on mastery, on purpose in life, on subjective health, not surprisingly, but also on socioeconomic status. They were lower on feelings of economic pressure. They were higher on social involvement. They were lower on average on age. And they had more women in the sample than the end-of-life sample, which was pretty much by design because we tried to get half women and half men in the end-of-life sample. And a higher percentage of the community sample were married than the end-of-life sample. Again, not surprisingly here, because often these were older and the spouse had already died. So we are controlling for all these other variables to make sure, that it's not based on the other demographic variables that can explain the results. But after controlling for all these variables, what we find that wisdom is positively related to subjective well-being, as predicted. But then controlling for life conditions, this is where we control for life conditions. Even after we control for life conditions, wisdom is still related to subjective well-being. And the end-of-life sample, those people who belong to the end-of-life sample, it's negatively related to subjective well-being, which is not surprising, compared to the community sample, that those who are at the end of life, either on hospice or in the nursing home, that their subjective well-being tends to be lower. But then what's interesting, that there is a significant interaction effect. Again, so similar to the life events in the past year. So for the community sample, the relationship between wisdom and subjective well-being is here. These are standardized effects, 0.23. But for the end-of-life sample, it's higher. It's about twice as much, twice as strong for the end-of-life sample. So for them, wisdom is really important for subjective well-being. And again, I want to just graphically show how this looks like. So this is the relationship between wisdom and subjective well-being. And this is how it looks for the community sample. Yes, there is a positive relationship. But for the end-of-life sample, it's really stronger, this relationship. And again, for those at the end of life, for those at the high wisdom, with high wisdom scores, there is no difference if they are in the community or at the end of life. Their subjective well-being is similar. So we look at the mediated path model. Wisdom was positively related to mastery, and those who were in the end of life had a lower sense of mastery. Again, it's not surprising that they felt less in control of their life. And wisdom and mastery was positively related to purpose in life. Again, these are the two flourishing variables here. So yes. And purpose in life, not mastery. After we controlling this for mastery, purpose in life was positively related to subjective well-being. But even after we control for mastery and purpose in life, there was a positive relationship between wisdom and subjective well-being, which was significantly stronger for the end-of-life sample than the community sample. And there was a negative relationship between the end-of-life sample and subjective well-being. So to conclude, I want to give you some ideas for what's happening, right? What is the association between wisdom, flourishing, and well-being based on qualitative findings? And so I present to you three relatively wise elders. So the question was, how do relatively wise elders cope with crises and obstacles in life? And these elders were asked, what were the most pleasant and unpleasant events you experienced during the last week, month, year, and entire life? And we were really interested in how they cope with the unpleasant events, but you can't just talk about unpleasant events. It would be a very depressing interview. So we were alternating between pleasant and unpleasant events. And these are the relatively wise elders who scored relatively high on the three-dimensional wisdom scale, but also were rated as relatively high by three independent raters. So these relatively wise elders are James, and these are all pseudonyms, a 77-year-old African-American retired school administrator with a graduate degree. Claire, a 59-year-old white homemaker with 10 years of schooling, and Edna, an 85-year-old white homemaker with a high school degree. And so what did they do? What were their coping strategies? Well, they first engaged in mental distancing. Then they used active coping, and they applied life lessons. So let's start with mental distancing. Relatively wise elders did not allow a crisis to overpower them. They took a step back, reflected on the situation, calmed down, and took time to look at the problem objectively and to think about it from an emotional distance. So James, who was the most reflective of the 6 respondents, probably due to his more advanced educational degree, expressed his mental preparation in this way. Normally, when something comes up that I'm unhappy about, the first thing I do is completely relax and say to myself, I'll get through it, or it will work out some way. Usually, if I relax and give whatever the problem is some thought, don't try to solve it right then, just give it some thought and it will come to me. I don't know how, but it just come to me and work itself out. But the thing is not to get frustrated over it. By not getting frustrated and trusting that the problem can somehow be solved, mental energies can be preserved and applied to the solution of the crisis rather than being engaged in worrying about the problem. It is definitely easier to deal with a problem if one is calm, open to possible solutions rather than nervous, agitated, and sick with worry. So in terms of active coping, the respondents engaged in reframing, making the best of things, and in taking control of the situation. So let's start with reframing. Wise elders learned that it is foolish to rely on external events to make them happy. They also knew that external events ultimately have no control over one's fate and happiness. No event can make one unhappy unless one allows the unpleasant feelings to fester within. Problem solving starts within, not on the outside. So they often use reframing to mentally define the problem as an interesting challenge or puzzle rather than an unpleasant event. They followed the motto, if life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Claire said, I don't really think of stuff as, what do you call it, unpleasant things? You go around them and you go on. You don't dwell on stuff like this. And then by taking control of the situation, wise elders knew that external events have no ultimate control over one's fate and happiness. James explained how this process works and how he dealt with unpleasant events during his long life. I've had as much bad things to happen as good things, but I've never allowed any outside force to take possession of my being. That means whenever I had a problem, I went to something wholesome to solve it. And I think this has been a secret that I've had, bad things and things that worry me, but I didn't let it take possession of me. And I did not pick up any. So wise elders also applied life lessons. They first learned from life experiences and they recognized and accepted life's unpredictability and uncertainties. So relatively wise elders were not devastated by crises and hardships in their life. On the contrary, they were able to learn from negative life experiences, which resulted in greater insight and wisdom. For example, Edna admitted that she made mistakes after the death of her husband, yet she did not brood over them, but viewed them as learning opportunities. She said, when my husband passed away 5 years ago, naturally, I was very upset. We were married 59 years. And it was a sudden thing. And I had to make adjustments like all widows do. And I agree, I made mistakes. But once I make the mistake, I try never to. I learn from it. And I try not to have it happen again. The application of life lessons also was related to the recognition and acceptance of life's unpredictability and uncertainties. All three relatively wise elders learned and accepted the fact that change is a part of life. Nevertheless, they had an optimistic faith in the future because they knew that they had control over how they chose to deal with negative events. They also knew that life exists of opportunities and that the unpleasant events in life are necessarily a complement to life's pleasant event. Claire said, even those things that are unpleasant and difficult are just part of life, as far as I'm concerned. Similarly, Edna emphasized that one needs to be prepared for difficulties in life. This 85-year-old elder had learned that hardship and difficulties are an integral part of life. She remarked, well, I haven't had anything happen bad to me that I couldn't handle during the last year. I mean, I just take it for granted that these things happen and you take care of them to the best of your ability. That's how I grew up. I've lived long enough to know that I'm not the only one in the world. Other people are going through terrible, terrible things. I don't dwell on terrible things, you know? I accept them and go from there. Moreover, wise elders were also aware and accepted that death is a part of life. So James realized that his mother's death was harder on him than it probably was on her. The thought that, why am I fretting? You're fretting for yourself. That's selfishness. That is selfish of you because you're really crying for yourself. You're missing her. But mother is at peace. She got tired. And I guess that's the time when you do as much as you can do or want to do. You're ready. You're not going to hasten it or do anything to cause it, but you're ready. And she told us she was ready. So what are you crying for? And for a short time, I worked on it badly, but I don't cry anymore. After James could acknowledge that his grief was self-centered and that he felt more sorry for himself than for his mother's, his pain subsided. So if we summarize the findings, wisdom is a significant predictor of subjective well-being in old age, even after controlling for resources and life conditions. Wisdom has a significantly stronger positive effect on subjective well-being when older adults face adverse life events and at the end of life. Resilience, mastery, purpose in life, and perceived stress mediate the association between wisdom and subjective well-being. But there appear to be several pathways that explain the relation between wisdom and subjective well-being. It's not just one pathway. There are also better coping and better emotion regulation, any different pathways that lead from wisdom to subjective well-being. So in conclusion, yes, practical wisdom is indeed the key to human flourishing. At least this is what I believe. Wisdom appears to strengthen individuals' ability to cope with crisis and hardship in life by increasing a sense of mastery, purpose, and resilience, and decreasing the perception of stress. Therefore, wisdom is a valuable psychological resource for human flourishing, not only in old age, but throughout the life course. Wisdom might be the result of learning how to cope successfully with crises and obstacles in life, and this is what's called the stress-related growth. If people learn successfully from crises and obstacles in life, not automatically, it can also be that crises and obstacles in life leads to despair. But if they learn to grow wiser as a result of this, then these are opportunities for wisdom to develop. So if individuals are given the resources and social support to grow in wisdom by strengthening the 3 dimensions of wisdom and engaging in mental distancing and active coping, they are more likely to recover from psychological stress and might be better equipped to cope with future crises, including age-related losses and the approach of deaths. So I want to end by this quote by Juvenal. Wisdom, I know, contains a powerful charm to vanquish fortune or at least disarm. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Monika. That's really interesting. Thank you for such exquisite trip and rich presentation. And that means a lot for us, you know. And you've actually answered many of my questions I had in mind. And they know that Amin already presented you. But I'm really curious to know about you, the human being behind all this endeavor. How did you become interested in wisdom in the first place? What motivates you to embark upon this wisdom research?
Yes, I was interested in life satisfaction in old age. And this is really my dissertation research. And I was interested in life satisfaction in old age from a life course perspective. I was working with Dr. Glenn Elder, and Glenn Elder has really developed the life course perspective. And so my question was, what variable could explain life satisfaction in old age that develops over the life course? And so I was playing around with different variables. I was looking at autonomy, but autonomy is kind of the first thing that goes in old age because, you know, people get sick or disabled, you know, and they retire and their life shrinks, you know. So autonomy wasn't a good candidate. I was thinking about coping, and hardiness, was looking at hardiness. Hardiness is a good variable too. But then it's kind of came to me and said, no, it's wisdom, right? It's wisdom. But I didn't know what to do with this. I didn't know how to define it. I didn't know how to measure it. And I was using the secondary data set that my mentor, Glenn Elder, had collected. And it contained data that was first collected in around 1920, actually, as part of a child development study. And I was looking at the parents of the children. And then these parents of the children were re-interviewed 40 years later. And so I had these data that spanned 40 years. And they had psychological variables on the data. They had the Q-sort, the ego ratings. And I was going to pick up a book in the library. So at this point, there were still physical books that you pick up. It wasn't all online, right?
Yes.
Thank God. So I went to the library and to pick up this book that explained this follow-up study, this 40-year follow-up study. And right next to this book was the Sternberg edited volume on wisdom, its nature, development, and something else. And I'm picking up this book and says, I can't believe it. People actually study wisdom. And so I got read it, and that, well, people define wisdom all over the place. You know, there is no unifying definition of wisdom, but many people referred back to this 1980 article by Clayton and Biren. So I went and got this article, and as you saw, you know, Clayton and Biren defined wisdom as a combination of cognitive, reflective, and affective dimension. And I said, wow, this makes so much sense. So maybe I cannot measure wisdom directly. You cannot ask people how wise on a scale from 0 to 10 would you think you are, right? Because the people who say 10, I'm clearly a 10, are clearly not wise, right? So because wise people are humble, right? Have you know, intellectual humility. So anyway, but I thought, well, you know, you might be able to measure the cognitive, reflective, and the affective compassionate dimension of wisdom. And yes, the Q sorts in the ego reading scale provided items. These were ratings in my data set, provided items so that I could measure the 3 dimensions. And so I did it, and it worked out. It was highly related to life satisfaction, even after I controlled for all the objective indicators of old age. And this is how I got started on wisdom research.
That's great. That's quite a lot on your plate. It's very inspiring as a story, and I think there's a lot of things to learn as a researcher, so we can get inspired by your journey to discover a concept and to get excited about. Now, I'm tempted to start by the perennial question, perhaps the perennial question about wisdom, how we define it in the first place. And I want to come back to this wisdom and happiness debates. You know, what caught my attention is this ignorance is a bliss stance, which is in line with all proper culture in Morocco. Actually, we consider people who are gullible and somehow foolish and as prone to happiness more than others. But it flies in the face of wisdom, as seen as the ability to soar through the illusion, to go beyond self-delusion and to see things as they are. How can we navigate through this?
That's a really good question. And yes, I think ignorance is bliss is probably true sometimes, right? But only in the short term, I would say. You know, in the long term, you know, it probably catches up on reality eventually. You know, so if you live under the self-illusion, you know, and you don't want to know about certain things, it might be you might feel better, right? Because I don't know about these things, but I think not in the long term. You know, in the long term, it's probably better to see reality as it is, because only then can work on things, you know. So one of the things, you know, is this, as I say, in the reflective dimension, the absence of subjectivity and projections. So if you have the illusion that I'm wonderful, you know, if something bad happens, you know, that's just the fault of others, other people, or, well, things just happened, there's nothing I could do about it, then there is nothing that would motivate me to change my behavior, right? Or to change my attitude. And then there is no progress, there is no transformation. So this is why this honesty is required, the self-honesty, to look at oneself, how am I actually, right? And that can be painful. This is why the self-compassion is also necessary, to see that it's not, yes, I'm not perfect. I have all these faults, but that's okay, because other people also have faults. And that makes me maybe more tolerant toward myself, but also tolerant toward other people. And I can forgive other people more easily. And maybe I can also forgive myself more easily. And that also helps then in the reduction of self-centeredness, which makes me then even more compassionate toward other people. So yes, ignorance is bliss might be good short term, but not long term. And in the end, by working on oneself, by working on becoming less self-centered, become more self-transcendent, that's where the happiness, the true happiness comes in, not the fleeting happiness because, I ate a great meal, or I went to the cinema, or, I had fun with friends, at a party. Yes, it was great then, but now I'm at home, and now I need the next thing to be happy. The happiness of the wise person is just this really true being satisfied, contentment with what is. And they are not easily thrown out of this contentment, not easily rattled by external events. And that's because they understand life deeply. They know life deeply, rather than, oh, I'd rather not know about it.
I see. So I'm happy that science is confirming that one should put aside this momentary search for well-being to gain wisdom. And it reminds me about this debate about redemption and exploration. So redemption leads to wisdom, I suppose, to well-being, I suppose. And while exploration leads to wisdom. Do you have anything to add about this?
Well, yes, in some ways, yes, exploration needs, this is a journey of wanting to know more, right? To explore what led to this, rather than trying to fix things, right? In terms of glossing over things, at least this is how I understand it, right? Glossing over things and trying to fix things so that I can get to feeling good about things as quickly as possible. Bad things happened, and rather than working through it, what was it, what might have led to it, what could I have done differently, just saying, oh, I'd rather not think about it. This is the past is past, and so therefore I don't need to think about it. However, from my perspective, it seems to be this dichotomy, one leads to wisdom and one leads to well-being. I still think that wisdom leads to well-being, because if it doesn't lead to well-being, then what's the point, right? You don't want to become wiser to end up being miserable, So in the end, the end goal is this contentment, not the superficial happiness that goes up and down, depending on what is happening, but this deep satisfaction with life, gratefulness about life, and just being able to weather all storms, this having this anchor of calmness, even in a storm. And so therefore you might not get exuberance, in terms of, this calm contentment that wisdom should lead to. And if it doesn't, as I say, then I think something is still missing.
I see. So I think you have answered a question I had. It's about, I came across a video of you talking about wisdom as a choice. So I suppose that you have just answered this question in the extent that we should choose to see things differently, to see reality and decide about the right attitude.
Yes, I mean, and it's not the easiest choice, let's put it this way, because it's not the easiest choice because you have to confront yourself, and sometimes it's easier not to confront oneself. The path of wisdom requires work. It doesn't come automatically. And I think I agree with Ursula Staudinger here that this is not normative. It's not necessarily encouraged in schools or in universities, maybe superficially, but not in a deep way, in a deeper way, because, well, there are other subjects to teach. Even so, some people now, start, character education in schools. Probably makes sense. And also, how do you do it? How do you become a wiser person, right? So this requires one of two things. Pascal Leone says, how do we become wiser people? What are the paths to development? And he says there are two paths to greater wisdom. And one is coping with adversity. And he says, these, particularly with these what he calls these ultimate limit situation, these are events that if they don't kill you, they might make you wiser, but not automatically, so these are these events, being confronted by terminal illness, a disability, any of these things that might really shake people up and says, what are you doing? Is this the right life you're living, or should you reorder your priorities? What is the purpose of life? What is the best life I can live? But it doesn't happen automatically. Some people just feel, oh, woe is me, and look, why did this happen? And they are not trying to reorder priorities. I think that's some of the choices, right, that's making. Is it an opportunity to become wiser, or is it an opportunity to blame everybody? But then the other path, what he's saying, is meditation, and meditation is an opportunity to confront oneself, quite frankly, to sit there and confront oneself and look at oneself from an outside perspective. I would add another path would probably be therapy, to help with a therapist, to help one to grow wiser. So absolutely, these are, but some ways to help one to reflect. Another path might be as simple as journal writing. At the end of the day, many wise people have suggested to write in a journal at the end of the day, what worked, what went well, and what was challenging, and why was it challenging, and then to reflect on this. And again, it's this reflection. I think the reflection matters.
That's particularly heartwarming because in my practice and as an educator, as a kind of coach, I used to use some method informed by ACT and acceptance and commitment theory, just to help people self-reflect about themselves. And it seems quite promising, like a path toward wisdom.
Absolutely. I think reflection is the key. That's why I'm saying from these three dimensions, the reflection, I think, is the important key. That will strengthen the other two dimensions. But of course, right, they are all related to each other because, with the reflection, people will understand life better. By understanding life better, they understand that reflection is important. At the same time, they're developing more compassion. By being more compassionate, they can more easily reflect on other people's behavior, on their own behavior, because they are not automatically engaging in subjectivity and projection. So they're all related in some ways. But yeah, absolutely, some way of finding to reflection, which can be through journal, through therapy, or to meditation.
Okay. Let me just move to the other sensitive points, sensitive aspects about wisdom and resilience and its relationship with well-being in general. It's about spirituality and religiosity. In what extent we have scientific evidence that argue about a kind of relationship between spirituality in general and religiosity in fostering or helping people getting wise.
Well, it depends how you measure it. It really depends how you measure it. For my scale, and it depends if you measure it as a religiosity, or if you measure it as spirituality. And then it depends how you measure spirituality. Yes. Because some people measure spirituality as purpose in life, and yes, then absolutely, there's a high correlation. But I tell you what I found, okay? So I looked at the relationship between wisdom and spirituality and religiosity. And I looked at the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic relation. And if in extrinsic religious orientation is basically for people who use their religion for extrinsic means. So, for example, to increase their standing in the community, to find solace in times of hardship, to find friends in the church, to eat the donuts and drink the coffee after church, some kind of things, some kind of extrinsic ways. And if I correlate this with my older adults, if I correlate this with the three-dimensional wisdom scale, there's actually a negative correlation between the two. But then in intrinsic religious orientation is people who dedicate their life to God or a higher power. So they are right? They are really committed to their religion. And what I found with wisdom and intrinsic religious orientation, there's no relationship. Now, what does this mean, right? Does this mean that wise people, are not religious, or religious people are not wise? No, I would say what I would argue is kind of the opposite, that you don't have to be religious to be wise, because there are lots of wise people who say, particular people who are highly educated, who say, I just can't believe in this stuff. The virgin birth and, the resurrection from the death, it's kind of, I just can't believe in it. It just doesn't make sense logically. So I cannot believe in this stuff. But they are humanists, they are dedicated humanists, they are, yes, I'm still live an ethical life, because what you're supposed to do, I still help others. So in some ways they live a spiritual life, just don't call it this. They would call it humanists. And there's this relation with wisdom. And there are people who are highly religious, but they're wise, and they are not interested in this of wisdom, where you need to develop your own personality, you need to become less self-centered. And these would be people who say, well, died for my sins, and I believe that Jesus is a saint, and I think Jesus, and that's it, right? End of story. I believe is the Son of God, believe in all of these things, and therefore I will end up in heaven. You know, they don't have interest of developing on becoming wise, becoming less self. They're just, believing is all I need to do, end of story. That's of course not the case, right? If you think about it, right, all religions care what it is. I think we're founded on the idea to help people become wiser. I think that is the whole idea of a religion, right? Or of a spiritual community, to help people become wiser. But then with time, it's a lot of work, right? And somebody says, well, you just have to believe in this and you're fine. I says, well, I do my rights and rituals, and I don't have to do the work, and that's so much easier, and I'm done, right? Check. And so this is why this is not a simple relationship between wisdom and wisdom and vigilance, wisdom and spirituality.
I see. Thank you for this precious clarification, because there's a lot of dust when it comes to talking about religiosity and spirituality, and people complain that they can see. Okay, now my last question perhaps ties in to your sociologist background. What do you feel wrong about our current system and institutions? I mean, we're living in a digital era, and is it beneficial or detrimental to wisdom development in general?
Can you be more specific in terms of what is beneficial or not?
This digital connectedness, this digital contact, this of information, possibility to be visible, to listen to people, to discover other cultures, and to be connected all the time. Does it make us more prone to, or does it robbing us from the natural human wisdom?
It depends how you use it, as always, right? It always depends how you use it. I think it provides the possibilities to connect with people from other cultures, like what we are doing right now. It's great, right? I mean, we have to be there in person together. We come together as a community without having to be physically present. Great, and so connect with people all over, without actually having to fly to all these, bring this inconvenience. This is great to have. It's also great to find community of like-minded people in terms of, who also want to develop on the path of wisdom. You can find them on the internet, you can form these communities and you feel you're not alone. I think the negative side is that you can also indulge in the shadow side of humanity, in prejudice, in hatred, find your community of equally prejudiced people against people. And that's amplified. Before, you might not know that many people, might know one other or two other people. Now you can say, oh, look, there are so many other people exactly like me. That's amplified as well. And that is then dangerous, to get this together. So it depends how you use it, and the other problem is that people get, if they are too, particularly young people, if they are too much on social media, they get the wrong impression what people are really like. They think all the other people are perfect and they live a perfect life, and I'm the only one who has difficulties, and I'm the only one who's not perfect and has not the perfect house or the perfect boyfriend or the perfect vacation or the perfect job or whatever it is. And that's of course not true. It's they are all curated, what's these social lives. But by being exposed to this, kind of exposed to untruths, I would say, people feel bad, and then they become unsatisfied with their own lives, and then they crave for the life that they think these other people have, crave for the product. So it's kind of advertisement run amok, I mean, we were always inundated by advertisement, but now other people provide the advertisement, for this. And craving is, of course, poisonous for the development of wisdom, so because you develop wisdom to be satisfied with what you have and not wanting something that you do not have. And from this perspective, it is not beneficial at all. So I think people need to really learn to engage into a social media diet, right? A social media diet, and only partake in these pieces that are beneficial for them, and basically say, forget about the other pieces that are not beneficial, that are actually harmful. So I mean, Facebook, I have an account on Facebook, but I don't use it because I actually quite don't understand what I'm supposed to do there. And I'm really not interested, in your day-to-day, musings of things that, so I'd rather have a more deeper relationship with people than the superficial relationship that there are on Facebook. And it's quite frankly, it's a waste of time often. People get really lost in social media, and they waste their time, and this time could have been used better by maybe doing the journaling or the meditation during that time.
So I call it trash
the
media.
secret of your outstanding productivity as a scientist.
From my point of view, I call it trash media, not social media, because everybody can find trash in there, and we know exactly who's profiling. And then the dangerous part, Dr. Monika, allow me to say, it's that you, maybe Saif and I, we know this because we've been and we lived the true sociability. But people now born digital or so-called Netflix generation, they don't know exactly what's out there to meet face to face, and they lose this skill of sociability. So then to talk about face to face, it's really something strange for them. And basically it impacts them directly, and it can lead to depression. And sometimes we hear a lot of problems when it comes to suicide and all these kind of things. I need, just because I have one question, and Saif is always monopolizing the conversation and never lets me to speak. I don't know, because he's so obsessed with the subjects. I'm gonna complain about. I'm gonna complain.
Of me. That's the unwise side of me.
I'm gonna complain about this. I'm gonna complain about this to our community about this. So now next time I need to start be the timekeeper and to associate question by him and mine and I. I had asked a question from some concerning wisdom and other people's experiences, and the question was: can we learn from other people's experiences to be wiser?
Yes, we can, but we have to apply it in our own life. We can use role models, wise role models. I think it's actually great to find wise role models. When I ask my students, often ask, think about a person who is really wise, and then think about a person who is really smart, and what's the difference? So to really think a little bit about the characteristics of wisdom. And when they think about a person who's really wise, they often think about a family member, like a grandmother, grandfather, or their mother or their father. And this is wonderful, because these can be the role models. And then you can model your life, can say, oh, look, I have this really wise grandfather. How does he live his life? Or this really wise grandmother, how do they do it, right? And then learn from them, and then do it accordingly. So it's not, and that can also happen by reading, books about wise people, but using them as inspiration for their own life, right? And then living accordingly. So yes, the answer is yes, but it's not enough to stop there, but then, to actually apply it in your own life.
So one of those students answer, and he support his argument by, well, even though I might experience other people lives or using them as a role model, my experience is not gonna be the same as this wise person experience, because I won't live it the same way, because we're not the same. So I'm not gonna gain like 100% or fully from that people wisdom, but from my perspective it would be different. But it doesn't stop me to apply it and to learn from it, regardless the benefit or maybe the repercussions or the consequences.
Right, but it's not really you have to have exactly the same experience. Something happened, there's an argument, how do they argue with other people, or, how do they deal with people? I don't know if somebody, is angry with them, what do they do in this situation, or, how, so it's more these general terms, not exactly the same life, but they can learn from but just by interacting with other people, I think you can learn a lot. Or, there is a crisis happening, something bad happened. What do they do? How do they deal with it? And that, so I'm sure, in every life, things happen that are not pleasant, how do they deal with this? Oh, okay, that's what they do. Like in my example, okay, they first take a step back, they relax, they let first look at it from another perspective, wait a little bit rather than jumping right in, and then they find a solution. Oh, I can do that too, right? I don't have to jump right in. I can take a step back and see what the situation is. So more like this, even so that exactly the same situation, of course, doesn't happen, but they can learn how they deal with life in general. And disappointment happened. Okay, how do they deal with disappointment? What do they say? What do they do? Oh, okay, I can learn from that.
Dr. Monika, honestly, I didn't have enough. And I believe I would continue by asking a lot of questions, and some questions that I hide it maybe for my student. It was my question directly. I'm being very honest. I need to confess. One last thing is, Dr. Saif, one last thing, Dr. Monika, and I'm going to stop right here. Does if you think, or having control in your life, or thinking control in your life, it make you less wiser?
If you think you have control in your life?
Yes.
Well, you have control in your life about your own your own reactions to things. That's the little control you have, Epictetus, the Stoics, this is exactly what the Stoics are saying, right? You have no control over your life in the end. There's no control, but you have a little bit of control about your beliefs and how you react to things. That's and that's hard already. That's very difficult. But if there's any kind of control in this world at all, that's what you have. That's all you have, right? Everything else is not up to you. But if you can manage this, if you have control over your own reactions, this is huge. This is absolutely huge, because let me give you an example, right? Somebody cuts you off in traffic. I really like this example. Somebody cuts you off in traffic. What is your typical reaction? Right?
Cursing.
But you don't have to. You can say, all right, here is somebody who might be very inconsiderate. Or here is a person who really needs to be somewhere else very quickly because something important happened. So I'm not getting angry. I just let it happen. Fine, what does it matter? that
Reframe.
helps me, right? That helps me to keep my equanimity, to keep my well-being, rather than getting angry, right? That's the control I have.
Thank you. Thank you for answering me. Dr. Saif.
Okay, I'm done. I'm overflowing with gratitude and
Thank you.
wonder. Thank you for this intellectual feast, and that means a lot for us. Thank you for your kindness, for answering the invitation, for saying yes, and giving us such amount of time. I know now that your time is so precious that you don't have minutes for Facebook or any other social media platform.
So I have time for that. I have time for that. And thank you so much for inviting me. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Dr. Monika. I'm really excited. I'm really, this is exactly the feeling I'm going to explain to you. I am high, really high. I'm stoned, really stoned. I'm going to have a beautiful night, beautiful. Like I'm gonna sleep like a baby. We're gonna have tonight only
with a
dreams
smile
about
frozen in your face as usual.
And if I
forget to say that we are working on translating your 3D scale into the Arabic Moroccan context. So we're gonna come up soon with some preliminary results, and we're gonna share them with you in order to give you an idea about how your scale can match with completely different culture.
Right, wonderful. And if you can share then the translation with me, because I like to share it with other researchers who might be interested. And also if you can share the link with me, if you put it up for the webinar, that would be nice.
That's great. With pleasure. With pleasure. Great pleasure.
Well,
thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Monika, for accepting our invitation. Really, we're very honored. And since we found similarities concerning wisdom and being in the same place as Florida, well, next time I'm going to visit you maybe with Dr. Saif to Florida and to go and visit University of Florida.
I've been to Morocco before. That's
no.
So
I think I only saw it at one point.
From airplane. Going to Germany.
Yeah, from Spain, when I was
from Spain.
visiting Spain, I think I saw it. I mean,
what we should do, we should have a conference or something, and we should invite you as a keynote speaker or something.
That would be wonderful.
Well, thank you very much for your hospitality. Thank you very much for your sharing, and have a beautiful night. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.